Hello. Just waiting for some co-hosts to join me.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, Nikki.
I'm going to be audio only briefly, but I'm definitely here.
Right. Sorry. So we're going to kick off in a few minutes, but just before we begin, I just want to point out to get involved in the discussion this evening, we've got both a Slack group that you can join, and which should be on the screen at the moment. And also there's YouTube live comments. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to monitor the YouTube comments very closely tonight, but definitely will be in the Slack and taking note of those. So we'll just give everyone another couple of minutes to sign up to the Slack if you want. That link that we've got on the slide should take you to a page where you can get an invite. And yeah, we'll be underway in a couple of minutes. All right, hello again. I'm back. So we're at 40 odd viewers on the YouTube stream now. So I think we're going to get started. Yeah, oops, let me work out. I'm just going to have to switch to my slide deck. Cool. All right. All right, so welcome everybody. This is April Koga Heads. We haven't had a Koga Heads in a while. It's been a couple of months, and since we also skipped January, it feels like it's been a while since we've had proper meetups. But I guess this is probably what we're going to have to get used to for a while now. So obviously, it's the first one being online. We'll slowly get better at this, but hopefully you enjoyed tonight. Hopefully things go well. So as always, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of this land, and pay my respects to elders both past and present. So just the usual housekeeping stuff. For starters, just saying hello from the hosting team. So I'm Zach. Hello, everyone. Hopefully some of you met me before. Some of you might not have, but yeah. We've also got Nikki and Carl on the call tonight, so I'll let them introduce themselves.
Yeah, hi, I'm Nikki. Recently joined the Coco Hits team, so I'm happy to be hosting this as well. I'll leave it over to Carl.
Hi, everybody. My hands are kind of blurring into the background.
That's all right, Carl. I don't think anyone can see you on the actual YouTube channel.
Cool. And we've also got Aaron, who helps out with Koga Heads. He's responsible for the stream tonight, so big thanks to Aaron for that. But he can't be with us in person. But I think he's watching along. So Yeah, thanks, Aaron, if you're watching. And also a big thank you to our sponsors. So we've got Bilu Academy and Atlassian. They help make Coca Heads possible. They cover our costs and help us out with things. So yeah, just a big thanks to all of them. You'll hear a little bit more about Academy from Tom quite shortly, but I'll leave the bulk of the spiel to the plug to him. Just a reminder that we have a code of conduct. So we want everyone to feel welcome and comfortable at Coca Heads. Our code of conduct can be read in full at the website by visiting that link that's on your screen. But it boils down to sort of 3 key points, and they are: be respectful, be inclusive, and be aware. If at any point in time tonight you feel like the meetup doesn't live up to the code of conduct, please let one of us, the organizers, know, and we'll deal with it as best we can. That obviously applies to all comments made in Slack as well as the YouTube comments as well. So just keep in mind before posting anything there. Obviously, it's a little bit different not being face-to-face, but the code of conduct still applies in anything you say at a Coca Heads event. So again, I seem to be plugging this constantly tonight, but we have a Slack community. Everyone's welcome to join, not just on meetup nights. It doesn't get too much attention during the sort of non-meetup periods of the month, but we'd like to change that. So if you want to jump on either for tonight's discussion or for just keeping in touch with other iOS developers in Sydney, just in general, feel free to jump on to the Slack group, share some thoughts, share some opinions, have a few discussions. It can be good fun. Yeah, hopefully you can see a few more faces in there, especially now with everyone predominantly working from home. It can be nice to sort of have that go-to place to have some discussions throughout the day. Now, I've kept this slide in here. Normally at our in-person meetups, we do a nice welcome for first-time attendees. This time, obviously, a little bit more difficult, but I did just want to welcome everyone who's joining for the first time, be that this is your first Coca Heads or this is your first Sydney Coca Heads if you're attending from out of Sydney. It was really cool looking at the meetup RSVPs over the last week and seeing familiar faces, but people who aren't able to normally attend the Sydney meetup because they live in Melbourne or other parts of Australia, or even there are a few international people. It's awesome to see so many people joining in the online format. So welcome everybody. So upcoming events, not much, but there's still some things. Obviously, a lot of the all of the in-person meetups, all of the in-person conferences have been cancelled for the foreseeable future, but there's a few things I still wanted to highlight, beginning with DevWorld, which is a really awesome conference for iOS developers, which normally takes place in Melbourne every year. This year, they have announced they're going online. There's not too much information available at the moment. All we know is that it's happening online. They've got a plan, and the famous quiz is apparently still going ahead. So that's good. So yeah, if you've attended DevWorld in the past, or if you've ever wanted to attend a DevWorld, it still seems like it'll be possible this year in a new online format. So that should be pretty cool. Keep an eye out for that. I did just want to give a shout out to the Melbourne Coca Heads iOS and macOS Dev meetup as well. They do an awesome job running the Melbourne. So the team behind it does an awesome job running Melbourne Coca Heads. And so since we're on this brave new world of everything being online, there's no reason why any of us can't attend the Melbourne Coca Heads as well. So that happens usually the week before Sydney Coca Heads on the second Thursday of the month. I was able to attend the remote meetup last week and it was awesome. So yeah, strongly recommend that. If you enjoyed tonight's meetup, you check out the Melbourne Coca Heads on Meetup and potentially attend in upcoming months. There are also a few other online conferences that I wanted to highlight. These are obviously normally in-person conferences, but this year are moving to being online. So it's both the App Builders Conference and UIConf, which more details are available on the respective websites. But it seems like they're doing some cool stuff with online remote conference software. So definitely worth checking out if you're interested in attending any remote conferences this year. So moving on to tonight's schedule, we've got one talk and we've also got, we've got a month in review. So I'll be sort of doing a little summary of the month that was. We've got a talk by Dimitri on configuration management. We'll also have a hiring and firing section. It's going to have to run a little bit differently this month. So for those for those who normally attend Cocoa Heads, you'll know that sort of in between the talks, we do a segment called Hiring and Firing, where if you're either looking for work or if you know of a place that's hiring, you can get up and give a little plug for either yourself or for the place that's hiring and let people know. Obviously, can't do that in person this month. So the best place to do that, we're going to do it in the jobs channel on Slack. So if you're in the Slack group and you're either looking for work or you have a role on offer, feel free to jump over to the jobs channel, post about it in there, and hopefully get some discussion going. So I did also want to now pass over to Tom from Academy, who's going to talk a little bit about Academy. They have been responsible for organizing tonight's meetup online, so the Zoom meetup. And they're hosting this Zoom call that the hosts are doing and then sending that onto YouTube. So big thanks to them for their help. And now I'm just going to pass over to Tom, who's going to talk a little bit about Academy.
I think hosting is a really nice way of putting it. We've somehow managed to sticky tape together about 9 different things. Hey everyone, let me just turn on my video here. Super glad to be involved with Cocoa Heads this month. I'm actually in San Francisco, stuck here in COVID fever. I'll keep it short, but for anyone watching, if you don't know me, I run a company called Academy. We do consulting. We also do recruiting for mobile developers in Sydney and all around the world, actually. I made a bit.ly, which hopefully will work. Hey, there we go. And I hope everyone can see that. Maybe I'll even minimize it. Let's see if I can do this here. If people can see that, can you see that there, Nikki?
Yeah, we
cool
can
beans.
see that.
So we've got bit.ly.
Yeah, we can see it.
Cool beans. So that's bit.ly/iOS jobs. It's a job list that we have going for Academy that we've actually just set up in the past week or so. There's mobile jobs in there, mostly iOS jobs. Also getting a bit of a feedback loop as well for people to start giving feedback on prospective jobs that are going around. There's obviously kind of a bunch of stuff changing in the job market right now. So it's good to kind of be on top of where things are happening. I know there are a few people looking. Also, if anyone's looking, feel free to ping me here or in the Slack or on GitHub or really anywhere you want. You can also go to workacademy.com.au and get in touch with me there if you're looking for a gig. So anyway, thanks for having me, and I'm going to hand back to you guys now.
Cool.
Thanks, Tom.
And thanks for staying up so late as well. In a bit late in San Francisco.
I'm going to hit stop share, which I think will.
Yeah,
hey, there we go. And then I'm going to mute my video. Bye.
Great. Now I've got to work out how to get my slides back up. Sorry, everyone. Just bear with me for a moment. Oops.
All good, Zach. Well, it's coming up.
Cool. All right. That look good?
Yep.
Cool. All right. So just a quick month in review. It's actually more like a month's plural in review because we didn't do a meetup last month. So most of the stuff's recent anyway. So I think the major thing that's happened in the world is everyone's working from home. We're all at home looking like that. Hopefully not while we work on the lounge. Just doing our thing, trying to stay safe from the virus, which has gotten considerably worse in the time since we've last had a meetup. So hopefully you're all managing to stay safe and stay out of it and make the most of the sort of work from home situation. But I think the first major bit of news, especially for us in the iOS dev community, that's sort of affects us that came out of COVID was the cancellation the cancellation of an in-person WWDC, not the cancellation of WWDC. So Apple announced that WWDC this year is going to take the form of a new online form. We're not really sure what that's going to look like. It's also they're being a bit ambiguous with the dates. We know that it's going to be sometime in June. We don't know when. But one of the parts from the announcement that sort of most interested me, and I know has generated a bit of discussion and question, is a quote from Craig Federici, which said that he welcomes or looks forward to welcoming developers to get their hands on new code and interacting in entirely new ways with Apple engineers. So we're not sure exactly what this online WWDC is going to look like, but hopefully they find ways to keep the sessions and keep the labs and sort of a lot of the value that we get out of WWDC. It's going to be different with us all sort of watching from home on our lounges, but I'm sure it'll still be cool nonetheless. So I guess stay tuned for more details about that over the next month. Maybe we'll find out more specific dates and things like that. But yeah, not at this point in time, there's not too much information. There was also a MacBook Air update. It's now cheaper and has some nicer specs. So the processor can go up to quad core, which is cool. And the new Magic Keyboard, the keyboard has been updated to the new Magic Keyboard from the 16-inch MacBook Pro, which is awesome. Sort of come at a good time with all these students having to work from home and do their schoolwork at home. So it's kind of a good computer maybe for a high school student or a beginning of uni or something like that. We also got an updated iPad Pro with a LiDAR scanner, which is sort of a really cool piece of technology that helps with depth sensing for AR apps. So it's quite exciting. And I know that there's APIs and stuff in AR kit for this. So it'll be interesting to see what developers do with this new technology. I think it's gonna sort of change the game for AR apps, and probably that same LiDAR sensor will come to the iPhone this year, which then should really open up the market for apps that can do cool things with it. So we'll see what that brings, but that's probably the most interesting part of the new iPad announcement. There was also a new Magic Keyboard, which is backlit and has a trackpad, which means that there's now sort of first-party support for trackpads on iOS, which is really cool because up until now, it's just been an accessibility feature, and it was sort of, there was pointer support I could use with a mouse or a trackpad, but it was kind of half-baked, whereas now that cursor support is sort of a more first-class citizen. It has priority in the OS, and there's some new APIs as well for hover effects and things like that. So you can sort of treat it as a proper, like a proper cursor on iOS as well, which is cool, and add hover states and things like that to your apps, which is quite cool. Then this morning we got the new updated iPhone SE. So it doesn't look like the old iPhone SE. It looks more like the iPhone 8. It's the most affordable iPhone. It starts at $750 Australian, which is not terrible given, I guess, the value of our dollar at the moment and the price of like the iPhone 11 and 11 Pros. And to me, the most interesting thing about this one is that it has an A13 Bionic chip, which is the same as in the iPhone 11 Pro. So you're not compromising on performance to get this phone. The cameras aren't quite as good as the 11 Pro, but performance-wise, it's going to be just as good, which is awesome, and probably means that like longevity-wise, it's going to be in that same camp as the iPhone 11. So it's actually a pretty solid phone, I think. And also, interestingly, it has Touch ID, which in this era of face masks, it's almost perfect. I don't know if any of you have tried to use Face ID with a face mask, but personally, I haven't had much luck. So this phone is good for that, if that's at all a concern. This article was kind of interesting, and I just wanted to call it out that the HomePod operating system is now based on tvOS as opposed to iOS. So there's rumors of a smaller HomePod on the horizon, about half the size. It probably means there's also going to be an update to the full-sized one. The chip in the existing HomePod, so the original HomePod, is an A8, which the A8 chip is probably going to be phased out in iOS this year with iOS 14. Don't know if it will support it. So I just thought that this article about moving from an iOS-based operating system to a tvOS-based operating system was quite interesting, because it probably means that they want to continue supporting that original HomePod with new software. And I imagine that the Apple TVs that run A8 processors will continue to get updates this year. But also it sort of changes the game of the way the HomePod's thought about, where the HomePod is a device that's always plugged in, always connected to power. So it doesn't have the same power constraints that an iOS device has, whereas every iOS device has a battery in it and it is power constrained at some point in time, and battery constrained. So this sort of recognizes that shift of, no, well, the HomePod is actually a device that's always plugged in and always has power, and you don't really have to worry about thermals as much and power consumption. So I don't know, it could be interesting. It could mean some interesting things for the HomePod operating system in the future. So we'll see. A major bit of news over the last sort of 6-ish weeks is all the Zoom drama. So now that everyone's working from home and using Zoom, I mean, we're using lots of video calling services, but Zoom is one of the ones that's getting a lot of attention because of how, I mean, it's getting popular because of how good it is. Like the video quality is awesome. The audio quality is amongst the best out of at least all the ones I've tried. But it's not without its controversy, of course. There's lots of privacy concerns with, there's heaps of issues, like lots of people Zoom bombing calls, when things aren't password protected. There was a bunch of articles about the iOS app sending maybe more information than it needs to Facebook by having the Facebook SDK embedded in it. There was some lies about the end-to-end encryption of the Zoom service. So it's more sort of client to server encrypted as opposed to end-to-end, as in like the person you're calling to you. So yeah, that sort of gave them a black mark. They used the shady install technique on macOS, sort of doing most of the installation stuff in the pre-installation phase of the scripts that they get to run. So a whole bunch of bad press for Zoom, which it's unfortunate. I mean, Zoom is obviously a dodgy citizen on macOS, but on the flip side, they have recognized those privacy issues and they are responding to them. So the CEO has said that the CEO has acknowledged the issue, and they're sort of working towards fixing a lot of the privacy issues. So I think they're on a 90-day, spending the next 90 days fixing privacy and security issues as opposed to adding new features to the app. So credit where it's due, they have taken the feedback on board. I guess we'll see sort of what Zoom looks like in 90 days and whether it's worth continuing.
Hopefully after Corona by then.
We can hope. Once everyone goes back to working in an office, Zoom might become mostly irrelevant again. We'll see.
Zoom just messaged me and said that we had to leave the call after all of that.
Whoops, there goes Coca Heads. Anyway, okay, so the next sort of bit of news, contact tracing. So there's been a lot of talk about contact tracing over the last few weeks, particularly media. And as far as, I mean, there's manual contact tracing, and a lot of that's been going on with relation to the virus. But about a week ago, we got a press release from Apple and Google simultaneously saying that they are sitting in a tree working together to develop a contact tracing technology. It's probably the most significant development in the contact tracing discussion, at least from a technological perspective. It's sort of meant to offer a more global standard than what individual governments are trying to do. It seems to be well thought out from a privacy and security standpoint. Things like not using GPS, sort of the key rotation, the frequency of that, the way that works seems to be quite good. Exclusively using Bluetooth. There's a bunch of statistics that come out like it that you need about 60% adoption for this to be effective. And so you're probably more likely to get towards that adoption if you use the Apple and Google solution as opposed to using like individual government third-party solutions. Anyway, but yeah, the whole like digital contact tracing thing is a lot easier than manual contact tracing, which can take ages to do, just contact tracing for a single person. So the timelines for this, I really recommend going and reading the Apple white papers. There's also been a bunch of good commentary written about it. Does far better justice to the whole issue than I can do in a summary. But the gist of it is that there'll be apps and APIs using this technology available in May. And then in the following months, the technology will be built into underlying operating systems, which I imagine means software updates for both iOS and Android. Sort of resulting in more broader Bluetooth-based contact tracing, which it feels like it's more like a long-term solution. So how, what technology are we using once we're hopefully allowed out in public again, to sort of to sort of control the spread of the virus. And I guess contact tracing is going to come into that and play a big part. Speaking of contact tracing, our government has decided to go with a solution that was also sold to the Singaporean government. And I believe there were some quotes of people saying they got the code from Singapore and they're going to, increase their privacy and security and release that app. I'm paraphrasing here, but so it doesn't seem like the Australian government's too keen on adopting the Apple and Google solution in May, but instead going with a third party. To end on some good news, I did just want to point out, or good news depending on how you look at it, I did just want to point out Apple have released aggregated anonymized data from Apple Maps. So they've made this public about sort of the decline in the number of trips people are taking via walking, driving, and on public transit. And you can see in this graph, it's a screenshot of the mobility trends from Sydney. Those things are down between about 40 and 80%, depending on which method of transport you're looking at. You can sort of see a little spike towards the end there if you're looking at, I think that would be the Easter weekend. So that's not great. It seems like people stayed home a bit less over the Easter weekend, but the general trend there sort of shows that people are staying home and are adhering to social distancing, which is really good. And yeah, that's all I've got for the month in review. I'm going to now pass over to Dimitri, who's going to talk. And yeah, Dimitri, when you're ready.
Yep. Hello, everyone. So I'm Dimitri. I'm a tech lead in one healthcare startup, and I've seen so many times that people face with the problem of configuring projects, and every time I join a company or another team, there is always a problem with project configuration, and I really think that every one of you has at least once faced with the similar problem. So let me share my presentation. Yeah. You see them?
That's up and working.
Parts? Anyone?
Yeah, that's up.
Oh, great. Okay, great. Let's start with the first slide. And basically, everything I wanted to talk today is related with the best practices and somehow just aim to save some time in your team and for your developers with initial configuration of your project, because project configuration comes first, right? And this is very, very essential step in your development process. Let me put it here. So every time we start a new project or we're starting on some sub-project, we basically go in our menu and create a project. Then you do some configuration, then code, and like maybe entire team do some coding. Then you test your project, test your product, and deploy your product. Maybe later your team will do some CI/CD configuration and integrate some unit test in this pipeline, configure some auto deploy. And eventually you will have very complex solution, which really depends on your very first initial steps. So what could potentially affect the project configuration and what could go wrong during these steps? So first of all, it is very important to consider your resources, everything you include in your bundle, like images, sounds, some other files, whatever. Second is build settings, something what might affect your eventual bundle. So it might be your bundle configuration, bundle ID. It might be some compilation configuration, or pre-compile configuration. Then environments. Obviously, environments are really important because if you're not developing like for yourself, or and you develop some kind of product for some users, you should consider at least several stages. First of all, development stage, where you develop all your features, then testing stage, where your QA engineers start testing your product, then staging, where you where your environment mimics production, and you do some final testing, and obviously prod, which is linked to your App Store configuration. Then extensions like today extension, notifications extensions, and maybe other extensions, they also really depend on your initial configuration because they are embedded into your main app. So it will be a little bit relate with the code. So I will show a bit code, a bit slides. So we will start with the very first step, and we will create a very simple project. So I've created one on in Xcode. So as you see, there are just one view controller and one delegate. So it's very simple. Nothing is configured yet. So, and at the next step, we will bring some structure to the code. As you see, I just added several folders, so it's not mandatory. So it really depends on your project. It really depends on your maybe guidelines of your company. But this is a good point to start with. So you can store some of your dependencies in this project. You might have models in your project. You have different modules. If you remember my last talk related with the REABS architecture, you store all your REABS, or if you're using, for example, Viper architecture, you can have your entire Viper model in these modules. Then other sources could contain your bridging header or something like that. Then all your resources should be probably isolated from other part of the project. Services, UI, everything like that. So as a next step, I want to discuss dependencies management. So while project grows, it becomes more and more complex, right? So at some point you want to split into multiple sub-projects, or you want to put something in your frameworks or libraries, whatever, or you even want to use sometimes external dependencies and link them with the CocoaPods or Cartouch or Swift Package Manager. Whatever dependency manager you want to use, somehow you need to consider your dependencies management in your project as well. So at this stage, let me add CocoaPod dependency. And I'll switch to the workspace file from now. So I added very simple pod. Nothing has changed in other parts of the project yet. So let's continue to the next step. This is how we added CocoaPod. Then adding stages. Specified in the target itself or build phases. I've seen projects when they specify multiple build phases for prod, but way less stages for other stages. Build steps for other stages. Okay. As a next step, what do you do next? You do add extensions. But if you try to add extensions with multiple targets, the first thing you notice that you have to specify in which main application you want to embed your extension. And this is kind of a first sign that something went wrong, and you might pay for this later. And you see here that by default, it selects the first configuration, the first target. And let's leave it for now as the first target. So our project will look more like that, where we have notification extension, which is associated with our development target. But we still need to solve a problem of the other targets and how we want to create our extension, how we want to embed all these extensions with our main target. And usually it's solved by simply multiplying the same basically target and link them with a proper target. not the best solution, but still many of them use this. Then let's try to add a simple file into our project. So when we add a file, let's say we want to add some simple configuration file which stores some static values, basically a struct which stores some static values and stores some configuration of the project, maybe build time configuration. And what first thing we noticed that when we created a project, we had to add this file into all our targets. We want this model be accessible from, even notification extension. So if, for example, you have 4 stages, so you need to have 4 different variations of your notification extension. And when you add a file, you need to add it to 4 plus 4, 8 different targets. So this is insane, but people do this. Yep. And then we add our configuration file. So it could be as easy as adding plist file to all our targets. So I created configuration plist file per each stage. So as you can see, it's a simple plist file. So, but we have separated plist file per each stage. Same as actually as info plist file. We have a separated plist file per each configuration, per each target. Then we go and implement actual fetching some values from this configuration. How it is done? It is done via modern way of property wrappers. Really, I really like this way, how you can wrap everything in your property. And this is really sweepy way of doing things, I think. So basically what we do here, we get value by the key, as everyone can do this these days. And we grab our configuration file. We try to get the value by this key and cast it to the type we provided for this property. So from our model point of view, it looks like we defining config property with the initial value, with the key and initial value, and then we can use it as a simply referencing it from a config class itself, struct itself. Then we will basically add some values into the configuration file, reading, as I already mentioned. And here we already have some problems. And can you quickly put on Slack, what problems do you see here? Any?
I'm just wondering what Git editor you're using there as well, Dimitri. It looks really cool.
Okay. I'll cover problems. So first problem, basically, it might look something very complex when you have to add one file to all the necessary targets you want this file to be part of. So sometimes it's very easy to miss one target, and later you'll find it during the deployment process or integration test that one of the targets simply doesn't build properly. Then, as I already mentioned, this is extensions management. So per each target, you need to create a separate extension and basically embed this extension into the same target. So it multiplies basically number of files. Then multiple info plist files. So for each target, you have to create their own plist file, or all of them should reference to the same one, but I want to recommend doing this way. Next one, application will crash or behave some in some unpredictable way. If the configuration file is corrupted or incorrectly configured, typed, or there are some typos in the property names, and you cannot find the match, so you can be really surprised that you call this property and you try to get this property from the file, but you cannot find it, and it either returns you null or simply crashes. And in general, it causes very, very important major issues with the entire development process. First of all, it impacts your team. It impacts your everyone in the project, involved in the project, and the project becomes unstable. So it becomes much easier to create errors in this case. Then, as I already mentioned, the configuration management, build configuration management becomes very, very complex, especially if you're trying to configure and configure CI/CD pipeline, and even with the fast lane, it becomes a nightmare. You have so many variables, moving parts. Then dependencies management. So it also becomes very complicated because even with the Coca pods, you have to define which pod you want to include in each target. So it also becomes error prone. Then eventually you get unstable app. So you don't really know when your app might crash because it all depends on so many moving pieces, and every piece basically can fail here, and there are multiple basically points of failure in this project. And eventually everything ends up with decreasing daily active users of your application, or monthly active users of your application. And this is nightmare. No one wants to do this. No one wants to experience this. But there is a way to fix all these things in very, very simple way. You don't have to actually spend hours or weeks reconfiguring all of this. It's very, very simple how you can fix all these issues in few simple steps. And for this, we will add Swift code to generate another Swift code. So basically, what we need some build script during which we will run during the build phase, which will parse our initial configuration file, and it will validate first of all our configuration and simply won't allow to build the project if the configuration is invalid. So it will give us first of all very, very cheap errors, very cheap to fix these errors, and you simply won't pass this build to your testers or to production. Sorry, if this configuration is invalid. And second and lastly, so it will be eventually it will generate Swift wrapper class, which is type safe and could be accessible from the entire project, and all variables could be accessed in safe way. And surprisingly, this is already done. There is a CocoaPod, not CocoaPod, there is a third-party product, third-party open source solution for this, and they call it Swift configuration. You can grab it from this link. And now I'll show you how easy it is configure and integrate into your project. So first of all, we will clean this up. We will clean up the entire project. We will remove everything back to the initial state. So our project, again, looks very, very simple now, but we still have our configuration file in here, our plist file here. And as a next step, we will add the build configurations. So basically, it is important that we can go and add different schemes. So you can find them on project settings. Here you can see that I added dev configuration, test configuration, prod, and staging configuration. So basically, configuration per each stage of the product environment. Then we will integrate the Swift configuration itself. So this is a very simple build script. We go to our build phases. So in our build phases, we just put our access call to our Swift configuration file, which basically parses our config plist file and generates a file which we can access from anywhere. So this file looks very simple. So it basically defines our environments, our stages, and then it safely gets all the values from the configuration file and cast them to necessary type. So eventually it looks like this. So basically you can map your current configuration and value from this configuration to your model property. So there is a small hint here. So in your info list file, you should add one variable, project configuration, and you define your active configuration. That means that during the build time, Xcode will resolve it to your active configuration, which we defined in here, and it will try to find it in your config list file. So in here, we will basically, it will try to find the node with the same configuration. So you can define all of them in one file, but eventually only one value will be picked from the list. So as I already said, it will auto-generate file, which we need to add to the project. Then we map a property from your model, configuration model, to the generated configuration, and we enjoy. So that's all. If we test it, it will work. But that's not the end. So we can put a cherry on top. So we can solve several other issues. Resource management. So in many projects, in all projects probably, you have to deal with different resources, right? So, and with images, with different files, with localizable strings, all this sort of kind of strings. Eventually, they all strings. And making a typo in a string is very simple, right? So it won't generate any compile time error. You'll just figure out when you launch the project and when you launch the app and you see it on the phone, you basically can see that your image is missing, or your localization is not correct, or you just see the your localization ID instead of the text, and all sort of this kind of things. So what we are going to do, we are going to eliminate all the string constants from the project. So this will significantly reduce all the errors, and it will also give us a way of autocomplete. So the coolest thing here is that Xcode will help you to autocomplete all the variables you're trying to access resource with. So for example, if you're trying to access your localizable string, it will autocomplete this localizable ID. If you're trying to access your image, it will also autocomplete your image path, or not path, ID of the image, of the resource. And there are several libraries for this. One of them is SwiftGen, another one is R. R is probably taken from Android world, so they use it. And but I find myself that I like more SwiftGen in this case. So I'll show you how to configure it. So first of all, we need to add a CocoaPod with the SwiftGen, and I will show you how it looks like. So we basically add a CocoaPod with the SwiftGen to the same target. Notice that right now we have only one target, only one notification extension target, but we have multiple configuration and we have multiple build schemes for the different environments we have. So everything now is much more simpler. When you add a file, you have to include it into only one target. When you add a resource, you have to include it only in one file. Everything is much simpler right now. So when you added your pod files with the SwiftGen, the second step is adding another build step to generate resources. It looks like here it looks a little bit messy, but what does it do? It just calls the script, which takes your localizable strings. For example, here I have localizable strings, and it parses it into Swift file, so which looks like this. So what it gives us, first of all, back to the configuration, it still looks like this. And for the resources, every time you want to access your localizable strings, you call and Xcode will automatically suggest you which resource you want to take. If you want to take, for example, image, Xcode also suggests you what kind of image you have. So currently I have just one icon, so I will use this one. So, and notice here that I don't have string variables at all. So it's extremely hard to do typo here. And it's really hard to make any sort of errors here, because it will be, first of all, compilation error. Xcode will simply won't compile your code. You wouldn't get this without string definition of your resources. So we covered integration of the SwiftGen project, and this is double profit. So we've got our resources optimized and safely wrapped with the class. We have our assets and localizable strings wrapped, and we have our build configuration wrapped with the type-safe class. And it gives us actually very simple management of this configuration. You can safely update this configuration before, let's say, running a CI/CD pipeline. You can substitute some values before running your CI/CD pipeline, or you can even mock it with some other values when you run your CI/CD pipeline on test environment, for example. So what we achieved during this integrations. So first of all, we have auto-generated configuration file with the strongly typed values, which completely eliminates all kind of typos, and it eliminates all kind of runtime errors. It all converts into build time errors. Now we have auto-generated assets class, which maps all your assets, meaning all your images. And you have all your localizable strings also wrapped in auto-generated file. We eliminated all string constants from the code, which is really important. And when you deal with the junior developers, or when you work with the mid-level developers, many of them are not familiar with how it might impact the huge project. But if you have a huge project, it's really important, and because it's really simple to make an error there. We significantly reduce manipulations with the build targets. So because we still have one target per main project and one target per extension, so it's not complex at all to manage them. And we saved the entire development team time. So many hours could be saved. So I believe this is really, might be really big achievements for your team if you integrate the same in your projects. So thank you for having me here. And if you want to download the same project, you can get it here. Just scan this code or just type in the same URL and let me know if you have any questions.
Well, thanks heaps, Dimitri. That was really awesome. We did have a couple of questions in the Slack. The first one was actually from Carl, so I'll hand over to him to ask his question, and then we've got one more to cover after that.
I see one question from Matt. What's the benefit of using config please file from instead of xconfig file? Yes, in xconfig file, you can define some variables, but I wouldn't put there all your kind of configuration for example, all your timeouts of the application, all your variables. For example, you have certain configuration for your services, right? So I wouldn't put there all your URLs and all your endpoints there. I wouldn't put in Xcode config file some default values, for example, timeouts, as I already mentioned, or default values for, let's say, profile settings, something like that. So it makes sense to put there some build related or Xcode related stuff there, but not everything. So I would definitely separate this. It's not a problem to use them all, both, but I would separate them. So business related configuration in one file, build related configuration in another file. What else?
Thanks. Carl, did you have a question, or are we moving on?
Yeah, so a lot of this is about configuration for different environments. What if you've got a lot of environments that you want to be able to test from the same app? Is there a way to generate all of this configuration into something that can be switched between in one single app and one target?
I'm not sure if we understand you. Could you?
So the setup you have at the moment has different targets for each of the different environments.
No, right now, eventually only one target.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah. So the problem is that we start with the multiple targets,
but still separate build configurations.
Build configurations. You mean these configurations, right? In the project configuration, yes, we have still different configurations, right?
How do you reduce the number of configurations back down to debug and release? And still support different environments?
It still depends. It depends how you want to organize your process, probably. So if your process is not complex, you still can use 2 configurations. But yeah, this is something I found useful to manage multiple environments. So
I don't want to give up the code generation.
Yep.
Code generation is really really saves my bacon at build time.
Yeah.
I guess the main thing is as things start to grow exponentially, making sure that can also be accounted for and still only have one app that you need to deploy out to testers.
This will be still one app, right? So you just have multiple schemes and several build configurations. So in your schema, you define which configuration you're picking up from the project and what you will deliver to the testing team. So, and still, you can define it in such a way that you can read the entire configuration file and give it to your testers so that they can easily switch the environment during the runtime, still using the same configuration.
Yep.
Requires a little bit more programming, but yeah, still achievable.
Probably just to be extrapolated by one more step.
Yeah, maybe.
Cool. And there was just a follow-up question from Matt as well in the Slack there, Dimitri.
What does it mean? How code generation will create multiple schemes? It doesn't generate multiple schemes. So the code generation works in such a way that it basically takes this configuration environment variable from your Xcode environment variables during build time, and it tries to fetch current configuration from your configuration file. And this configuration will be wrapped in the Swift file. So not sure if I answered your question.
Yeah, he's got a follow-up question a couple messages up. So is it possible to use the same technique to fetch configurations from a remote server at launch time? Apparently the follow-up question was in relation to that.
I believe so. Yeah, you can use JSON, for example, file, not only plist file. So you can use the same with a JSON file, and you can probably reload your configuration because it accesses it in runtime, right? So it tries to fetch all the values from the configuration during runtime. So from the file. So whatever source of the file you provide, it should be fine. So that's the coolest part. So you can have one predefined configuration locally, but you can still fetch something from your remote service and update this configuration. And it still will stay safe, type safe.
Cool. All right. Is that it from your end, Dimitri?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That was really awesome. It seemed like from the engagement in Slack that everyone really liked that talk as well. So that's awesome. If anyone wants to ask Dimitri any more questions, he is in Slack. So feel free to do that. If we were in person, I'd ask for a round of applause, but we can't really do that.
We can still do that.
Yay. All right. So thank you so much, everyone, for virtually attending this meetup. It was awesome. This was obviously our first online meetup experience, but hopefully you enjoyed it. I know we enjoyed running it. If you've got any suggestions on what we can do better next month, feel free to send them our way. Speaking of next month, we're going ahead third Thursday as always, but we do need talks. At the moment, we have no talks. So if you're interested in presenting at an online meetup this time next month, please get in touch with myself or any of the other hosts, or also fill out the form on the Coca-Heads website. It'd be great to have someone talk about anything really, even if it's just a lightning talk. Please feel free to send that through. I'm happy to work with people on talk proposals as well. If you have a topic and you'd like to sort of work through making it into a talk, I'm happy to sit down with you and organize that if that's of interest. And also, it's obviously not just open to people from Sydney. If you're able to present at this meetup by being awake at this time, please feel free. We'd be happy to have anyone present. It'd be really awesome to see a variety of talks. So if anyone's interested in talking in the coming months, let me know. Otherwise, thanks everyone for attending, and we'll see you all next month.
Thanks, everyone.
Please remember to stack the chairs towards the back of the room, put them in the cupboards.
And we need to do something about this pizza situation. Everybody's been asking about pizzas right now.
Yeah, sorry you didn't get pizzas delivered to your house. Maybe next month, we'll see. No, thank you. Thanks everyone for attending, and enjoy the rest of your evening.